Welcome to Sauder TV. I'm Phil Weinzimmer, a journalist for Sauder, and also an author and consultant, and my latest book is called The Strategic CIO. And one of the things I found in learning about strategic IT organizations and how they partner with the business more collaboratively today is really the whole education arm of companies who are investing more in employee training. So I thought it would be interesting if we interviewed some chief learning officers to get their perspective on how companies are training tomorrow's leaders. So to do that today, we have the chief learning officer of Unisys, Emma Engel, who is the chief learning officer, as I said, of Unisys University, which is the training arm for Unisys. Emma, welcome to Sauder TV.
Thank you.
You've had a really interesting career in the learning and development field. You've worked in numerous countries, almost 24 countries around the globe. You've lived in many, many places. And currently you live right outside of Philadelphia in your role as the Chief Learning Officer for Unisys. So how did you get there? What was your journey like?
Some days it seems longer, some days it seems shorter than what it has been. Started off in Johannesburg. I have degrees in clinical psychology and I thought I was going in one direction, and then got some great opportunities. Traveled to London, to Sydney, looked after Asia Pacific region, a couple of different roles, both in corporate training, sales training, consulting, and so forth. And it's been a fun and an interesting journey to be able to gain experience of different cultures, different ways people work. Because it's very different when you're just traveling into a country or perhaps when you're on vacation than what it is when you're actually working there and having to get up every morning and go into the office. And it's given me a very different perspective around training and just how very different people learn, different ways of learning, and not just the traditional, whether it's kinetic or whether it's visual or auditory type of learning, but just really around styles.
Mm-hmm. Well, Unisys University started, I think it was in 1999. How has it evolved since its inception?
Some massive changes. I mean, when we started out as Unisys University, we were really arranged like a university. We had schools, we had deans of the different schools, we had separate groups of people that were classroom facilitators and instructional designers, developers. It was all face-to-face. We ran 12-week programs for engineer apprentices out of Lyle in Chicago. And then, over the years, things changed. A lot changed. We had funding challenges. We also became significantly more virtual as an organization, as Unisys. We're still in over 100 countries. We work on a lot of large projects where our associates are on site all day and need to be developed in key areas. We can't keep bringing them all in. So, over time, we really took a look at what we were challenged at around wanting to deliver the same level of training and the same level of knowledge to our associates, but we just couldn't do it anymore from a classroom perspective. So about 10 years ago, we took a large leap. A lot of organizations kind of dabble a bit in online and so on. We went all the way. Mm-hmm. We closed down a lot of our offices. We closed down a lot of training centers in that way. And so it was quite a challenge to the learning team to adapt now to a different way of doing things. Mm-hmm. So we moved much more online. We leveraged a large relationship that we had with Skillsoft. But still, we found that with the generations that we had working for Unisys, it was a tough change when you're used to that amount of classroom training to now be completely on your own, on demand, possibly during work hours or after hours when you're doing training now. Anyway, when I took over the university in 2013, we were challenged again to do some downsizing. And then we were also challenged to look and see there was so much more that was available in terms of tools and platforms and so on that we could now start taking advantage of, because we had then come to realize that perhaps completely on your own out there doing your own training was not ideal. And so we swung the pendulum back just a little bit. And so we've gone much more towards virtual instructor-led training. So live events where people connect virtually but are able to connect with an instructor still. We do a lot more that's interactive, using different training tools now. So it's kind of been a journey from one end of the spectrum all the way to the other end of the spectrum, and then back a little bit closer to the middle, where we now focus also some of our, I would say, more strategic programs. So like our executive leadership workshop, we do now bring people in together, because we found that the value of the networking, once you get up to the senior director and executive levels, is very important as a global organization.
How has not only the Unisys University team adapted to this, but how have the business units adapted to this in terms of the change in focus and the different skills that you're trying to improve?
So around 2015, we had a change in leadership. We have a new CEO. And so obviously comes with that new change in leadership and some changes in structuring of the organization. We moved much more towards a vertical structure with a focus in commercial and financial services and digital government. And during that time, the last thing on most people's mind is really training, because you're still trying to figure out what skills you need, which people are going to be in which roles, and so on. And so, a learning organization really needs to just be with the business as they're going through this and help them to understand what are the skills that they're going to be needing in the future. They may not know what training they need at this point because they don't understand the gaps. They really just need to understand where they're going. And so I challenged my team to really develop a consulting mindset. So it was less about building training or delivering training, but it was more about building a relationship with the business. And so for that first year, it was quite challenging to a team of learning consultants now who had not done that. And so, hats off to them. They did a fantastic job building those relationships. And what that meant was that they got a really strong understanding of the business unit that they were part of. They developed this relationship with the leader of that service line or that business unit. So when we got to the end of that year and the dust had settled, they were now seen as part of the leadership group in each of the business units and each of the service lines. And so they were in a much stronger role to now provide advice and guidance around the training that now needed to come, because the gap analysis was now ready to be done. And so, I saw my team's skills evolve. We did some training internally to try and develop those skills. I saw them evolve, but it was interesting to see just their confidence, the respect that Unisys University got back, which perhaps, had gotten a little bit lost over the years because we just built anything for anybody who squealed. So we got that respect back, and I think we got a much closer alignment with the business, which meant that what we built now was linked to the strategy. Whatever training we designed or we delivered in the business was supported by the leadership, and that has made a huge difference to the adoption of learning at Unisys.
So that talks to any organization in any large corporate structure that is viewed as a service center or a cost center, and oh, they're a pain in the butt. If they take the view of trying to understand the business and what their needs are, and which is what you've done, is they become part of the leadership team of that business, as opposed to, oh, that's the training organization. And so you built the foundation to really build upon and improve the value of Unisys University.
Correct, and it was also, it was learning to speak their language, because I think so often learning professionals get involved almost in their own language.
Right,
and
right.
I remember sometimes, you know, one of the consultants saying to me, Emma, I struggle because they can't explain what their learning outcome is. And, you know, the coaching I provided was around, go back and ask them what they need to know at the end of the training that they don't know at the beginning.
Yeah, right.
It's the same thing.
Right.
But now it's simpler terms, and you're not scaring them with our language.
So it's the same thing in IT. You know, talk the language of the business. Don't talk the language of your competency. So when you start talking in learning lingo, like what are the learning objectives,
Yes.
as opposed to what are the outcomes that you want people to take away to improve the value in their job? It's the same thing.
Yes.
It's connecting the dots.
It's connecting the dots in their language.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's.
And it's also building a respect, because when you understand the business well enough to be able to advise what knowledge they need,
Right.
and to you get the right, you earn the right,
Right.
to push back
Right.
when they ask for things that perhaps aren't going to deliver the learning outcomes that they need to have. And that was also part of the change that I saw, was a learning team that was now confident enough to push back when they were asked to do things that perhaps weren't going to add value.
What do you see as some of the greatest challenges that CLOs are facing? And you know, one of them you talked about earlier about, you know, be part of the business. Don't just, you know. So that's one. I know that one. You talked about that earlier, but there must be some others as well.
Sure. So I would probably see one of the biggest ones is the speed of change. Just how quickly things are changing in the business. You know, when I started out, product life cycle, you had maybe one upgrade every 12 months. Now we're upgrading every month. And that's not just our proprietary technology, but that's things like Microsoft training. It's things like Oracle and so on, where, you know, you no longer have the time to build this really fancy training program, because by the time you've built it, it's 2 versions late. So it's that speed of change. It's the shorter shelf life of skills. Where people need to be able to build and learn things very quickly, and you need to make sure that while they have the foundation, you're not always going to be able to give them the foundation, because the speed of change. And with all the change that's out there, skills around change management are just becoming critical to leaders, because in times of great uncertainty, with lots of things happening around you, as a leader, you need to provide some level of stability, because otherwise things can get completely lost and productivity goes down. Right. So it's finding that balance between managing change, embracing change, and providing some level of stability that enables productivity. So it's finding those. And then I think from a learning leader, it's being able to provide really the right skills at the right time, but also thinking ahead and thinking about, you know, what skills are we going to need in the future, and how do I take what we have right now and build on that. And Phil, I think there's probably one more that I'd add, was just really around the multiple generations in the workforce. There's so much focus right now on millennials and the generation coming behind them as well. And, you know, when I look at Unisys, we've got 5 generations in our workforce, just in my own team.
Right.
You know, I have tenure from 41 years with Unisys right down to 6 months with Unisys, just in my own team.
Wow.
So you can understand some of the challenges that brings just from team dynamics, and it's wonderful on most days because the perspectives are just fantastic. Yeah. But if I think about from a learning perspective, to try and engage all 5 generations with the same training module, that's not possible. Yeah. So it's figuring out what platforms appeal to, you know, which generation, and even within a generation, they don't learn the same way. Right. So it's really just that challenge around building education and learning that's going to engage whoever needs to take it.
What are some of the key components that you find are lacking in an organization's talent management strategy, and how when you think about it, it needs to impact both the morale of an employee, because you want to retain the employee, but you also want employees to perform well. So there's a performance factor. So what's your perspective on that?
For one of the things that I would think is lacking is perhaps a healthy balance between build versus buy. And that, by that I mean there is a tendency that because, about the change that I spoke about previously that is so fast, there's a tendency to not necessarily look ahead and do the level of workforce planning that needs to be done. So what tends to happen is there's a need in the business, it gets given to recruitment. They go to market, they bring somebody in.
Right.
Typically bringing somebody in is probably a bit more expensive than maybe having trained up somebody within the organization.
Right.
So I think it's that looking ahead and really understanding what you have in terms of capabilities in your own associates, and then looking ahead to see what are we going to need and putting together a build strategy around your team. In terms of healthy succession planning, are you looking across your whole organization, not just for those people that perhaps are, let's say, more noticed around the organization, but truly looking across your organization at capability and at the development to move people up within the organization, so to promote from within. I think the impact on morale there is probably clear, which is if I see that I can learn and develop in my organization and I'm rewarded for doing a good job by whether it's movement, promotion, opportunities and so on, it builds that loyalty to the company, but equally it builds a work ethic and productivity. I think one of the other changes that needs to come is a value put on knowledge of the company. So, in my terms, I would say Unisys knowledge. There is a certain value to having somebody who understands the way things work in a company, who understands your processes or your forms or your policies and so on. And the culture as well, who understands that and then just gets on with their job. Or perhaps I just need to teach them about the new product or the new solution that has come out or the new service. Versus bringing somebody new in who perhaps, yes, absolutely, there's value in what they bring, in that they bring some outside-in knowledge, perhaps they bring domain expertise that we didn't have, but really in a way I now have to teach them all about Unisys and about how to work and how to get things done. I remember one of the sales managers saying to me, Emma, I need you to teach my salespeople just how to get a deal done in this company. And that's exactly it. We had to put a program together to teach them how it gets things done. So, so that there is value around that, and I think we need to recognize that, both in succession planning, both in building capability and in workforce strategy, really.
The role of a CLO today, as companies are starting to recognize that technology is at the core of their business, and companies are starting to realize, ooh, we're digital now. We've got to become digital. We've got to transform. So you hear terms like digital transformation, and we've got to get our people to really understand what, to be ready for the digital world. Well, those are two very broad statements. And when you take that and you synthesize it in terms of your role of helping the employees, number one, understand what it means in terms of them personally in their role, that's one thing. The second, as companies go through a digital transformation process, there's also the corporate side of what the impact is to the whole organization. So that must be really challenging for a chief learning officer.
I think it's challenging as well as interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's been a wonderful opportunity, I think, to embrace it. Unisys being, a technology-driven organization, we have a lot of the tools. We have Yammer, we have Skype for Business that has instant messaging and so forth. So we have all of that digital, which can become quite noisy. we also have an incredibly virtual workforce. So I think probably top of our learning training courses and so on that constantly when we measure it is virtual teaming, managing and leading a virtual team and so on. And so it's trying to really teach Unisys how to embrace all of this technology that's available in a way that it maximizes collaboration but doesn't be disruptive to the point where it actually impacts productivity, that it really has to increase productivity, not decrease it. So I think that's one of the areas where we really have had to look at how to use the technology effectively, how to use digital. On the other side of the house, it's forced me to keep much more abreast of what is available from a learning technology perspective, because once again, now with the increasing bandwidth and so on, we used to not be able to deliver video across our network, and in the end we had to go and buy a separate solution for training so that we could actually deliver video to our associates in China and in Malaysia and so on, because we didn't necessarily have the bandwidth for that. So in some cases, Unisys University has been that a little bit ahead because of what we needed to deliver to make it a little bit more interesting and compelling for our users to be part of. In some ways, it's also forced us to look for creative solutions. So when we closed down a lot of our facilities, I think I said earlier on, some of our generations were used to coming for classroom training. We found a wonderful application that was a virtual classroom that we ended up using for our sales kickoff the following year, because we had a virtual auditorium that you came into, and you went into a full auditorium to watch some of the presentations. We had a whole virtual partner room, exhibition hall, that they could walk through virtually with avatars and meet our different vendors and partners that we worked with. So, it's looking at that kind of world, and I think it's really been an interesting challenge for me to look at all of the tools that are out there and really determine which were going to help us achieve the learning that we needed to. Because there's a lot of very attractive, cool toys out there, but they cost money, and they need to deliver a return on investment. Right. So it's constantly looking, seeing what's out there, and then determining what the need is to see, how we can pull them together. And we've been quite fortunate in a number of the tools that we've engaged for our different programs and the feedback that we've had around that. So it's finding that blend between providing the education on the new digital skills and so on, while using the technology yourself, but not getting sucked into some things that perhaps are more fun and don't really deliver ROI.
Developing a digital learning strategy is not just putting the pieces in place, and there's, just like any program, there needs to be a framework, and everybody has different frameworks. So what framework do you think is important when companies are putting together a digital learning program?
I like Josh Berson's framework. He talks about, education, exposure, experience, and environment. Right. And for me, that sometimes can get lost if you focus too much on the digital side, the technical side, which is really only the last E, which is around environment, which is the tools and so on that you use. So I think as you put together that digital strategy, you need to ensure that your learners are really getting the full experience. And by the full experience, I mean they're getting the awareness, they're getting the formal education that you're offering to them, and there's a lot of different thought around micro learning versus in-depth learning, etc. They're getting the exposure, so they're getting mentoring, are they getting coaching and so forth, and then are they getting the experience? So the models are still around the 70-20-10 of learning, and 70% is around experience. It's about getting out there, it's about shadowing, and And I think, you know, in that way the tools can play a role as well, that you can use the tools that are available nowadays, like you can FaceTime and actually be on a sales call with a sales rep without physically having to be with them. You can do presentations and role plays and so on using the technology. So it's a way of blending them together, and I think that's really important. I think the other thing not to lose sight of is that this whole digital world can also create risk. And so, for example, you know, one of our programs, which was a highly technical curriculum, it was a 3-day face-to-face program with hands-on installation, configuration, etc. of tools, of our security tool, Stealth. We were asked to pull that whole thing online, make it completely on demand. And we were very uncomfortable with that as a learning organization, because in a way we lost control. You know, we couldn't see whether they just put it on run and, you know, went out for a cup of tea. We wanted to ensure that it was asking questions and so on, but typically in online learning, you know, you're testing recall, really not necessarily understanding to a certain extent. And so that really stretched my team. And what they did is they, around the whole online learning, they designed a certification program. They designed exams which tested understanding, but then equally they designed assignments, and they created a full lab environment that the learner actually has to go through and do a full installation, configuration, and so on, that can be watched. I mean, this is...
So it's the experiential piece
exactly.
as opposed to the knowledge piece.
Correct, that whole experiential piece. And it's kind of fascinating, because one of my trainers, I'll see when he's watching somebody do it, because he'll be sitting at his desk in the office in Bluebell, and he can be watching somebody who is in Sydney, Australia, walking through the lab, and he can actually watch all the steps that they do, and he can send through ideas to them when he can see that they're stuck. And we're doing that whole thing virtually. So, you know, we were able to mitigate that risk of us not feeling comfortable that they actually knew what they were doing, but designing something else around it using technology.
So what's really interesting, like in my world of strategic IT organizations, so one of the big issues as personnel are now collaborating as part of teams is they need to, as we talked earlier, speak the language of the business, just like learning advisors and consultants need to do that. And when you're upskilling those personnel, the old school is just teach them stuff, teach them stuff, teach them stuff. And knowledge is one component, and experience is another. And what you've done here is you train them in the knowledge and test them in the knowledge, and then you train them in the experience, and you basically test them in the experience, because it's real life. Yes. So now you know where the gap is, because someone may be really good at the knowledge piece, but they stumble and fumble through the experience piece. Right. Or it could be the other way around. You know, IKEA furniture is a great example. You know, how many people actually look at the instructions? So it's not the knowledge piece.
Well, not at the start. They tend to come back to the instructions when it's not working so well.
So there are people that just go, I don't need to know. I'll just do it. I'll figure it out. But really, the knowledge piece and the experiential piece are really important. So I like your model.
And we've actually built on it. So two things to add to that. The first one is, yes, we get some of those people that say, I don't need to take the training. I know how to do this. I've been working on this tool. I'll go in and do it. And that's fine. Then go ahead. And we see, and if they do, and they are able to go through the certification and the lab work, and they finish, and they do it successfully, they get their certification. So we've built in an element of recognition of prior learning, or if they've had on-the-job experience, they can come and get certified officially by really just doing that component. So we allow for that. The other thing that this environment and you know, together with our whole learning management system and so on, is the analytics. So that's, I guess, one of the really interesting areas of learning now is because all of this is digital, we have all this analytical capability. So to the example that you've just said, I can see that the last 3 people that did that lab got stuck here. So I can in real time go and modify the training material, the knowledge, to go and make sure that I train that a little bit more
so
in depth, because
is.
I can see where that gap is. I don't have to wait for feedback or wait for people who might, in 2 weeks' time send me a survey or something like that. I can see it and I can fix it. And so that's been really a valuable part for me about the analytics, and also to see, where are the interest levels. We have ways of even tracking to see how long you stayed in the training and where you stopped. And I can see, a lot of people seem to have a real interest in this area. Let me go and really push that part in our education curriculum. So it's kind of almost intelligent learning and production of content.
Yeah, that's cool. So another area to delve into in terms of digital learning is executive leadership programs. So I know earlier you said you talked about how you've looked at executive leadership programs in terms of going from virtual and face-to-face, and you have this blended program across the different levels of the organization. So can you tell us about the program and some of the interesting, I know we talked a little bit about it, some of the unique elements that you've used to keep, to really execute a good digital learning. But also one of the things that's important is it's not just having executives go through the program and then they leave and then they go back and you never see them again. And it's how do you utilize their expertise in subsequent programs so you have this reinforcement of learning loop going on. So I think that would be interesting. So tell us a little bit about that.
So in this new world of the digital workplace, the digital workforce, there really is this need for a different kind of leader. It's a different kind of management. And when we first created the Executive Leadership Workshop, it was at the request of our CEO. Coming in new, he felt that it would be well worthwhile to I guess, re-educate our leadership around what the expectations were. It was about really taking the strategy and embodying the strategy in everything that they do. And the feeling was that, if we could get everybody from our CEO, his direct reports, and 2 layers below that, we could take them through this program, we could really impact the culture and the change as to what our new CEO wanted to see from our leaders. So we worked with an external organization to bring some thought leadership in. We created an incredibly interactive workshop. It started off as a 4-day workshop. We're down to 3.5 days, and we're working to get it to 3 days. Again, from a requirement from the business, which is these are our senior people, to pull them out of the business for 3 days, and in many cases it's a whole week, particularly for our internationals that come in. Right. It's a big commitment from an organization to do that, but our senior leaders felt that this was worthwhile. So we designed the workshop. It's highly interactive. There's very little theory because we've gone down the path of when we meet face to face, we want that to be the experiential part. So we've leveraged technology in that as part of the design of the workshop. It was flagged that our leaders needed to get a certain base of our products and our solutions across the business. So we built proprietary content on that, which we leveraged and assigned, in the old way of assigned online learning. We also built some modules that would start to touch on some of the content that was inside the workshop that people brought as pre-work. And as part of the tool that we used, they were actually able to start collaboration before they even came into the workshop, which if you think is kind of interesting, considering that each workshop we ensure there's a blend of our 4 regions. There has to be a complete blend of all our service lines and all our business units, and we work towards a diversity blend of male and female. So it's kind of interesting putting together those workshops to get the right group of people in there.
What's the size?
We have 30. So we have 30 people in the cohort.
That's a large.
It's a large group. Yeah. And as I say, they can start the collaboration online. Yeah. I mentioned our virtual training center. So we actually make that available. They have a dedicated room in our virtual training center to actually start their journey. Yeah. They then come together face to face. We have 7 modules we deliver. As I said, it's highly interactive, and every scenario that we use, we call it leadership engagement labs rather than role play, because we say, you know, we want you to react as you would really do, not as you think we might expect. And that's been kind of interesting to see some of the different cultural learnings as we've done these activities. And you know, we get to the end of the workshop and we say, so, were there any of those activities that you felt was just kind of plucked from, you know, no reality? And everybody's, oh no, I've lived through a lot of those scenarios. And so then, you know, post the workshop, we look to reinforce the content, and so we do it a couple of different ways. We have once every 2 months, we reconnect in what we call our Executive Leadership Workshop Connect, which is live virtual sessions where we have a topic that is selected by one of the participants, one of the alumni, and that gets covered then as a discussion topic. We also use a retention app. So we built an app internally that gets sent out to all of the workshop as they complete. It's 90 days after they complete. And so it's to look to see how much knowledge did they retain, and we gamified the whole thing. So we have like 3 or 4 of the different workshops that play against one another with leaderboards on their mobile phones and so on. And then probably one of the other things that we did is over time, we phased out the external organization that we were using, partly for cost, partly because we wanted to really own it ourselves. And we then started to use alumni that had been through the program as guest presenters. And so we've selected some of our most senior leaders that have been through the program that now come back and present as guest presenters. So for example, our head of innovation and strategy out of our engineering group comes back and delivers the innovation module. One of our senior leaders in finance and product lifecycle development and management comes back and delivers our growing the business module. So, you know, they bring with them experience from before they worked with Unisys. They bring with them the Unisys experience to make it real to those people in the room. And equally, because, you know, we have a little bit of a mix in terms of levels of people attending the class, they get direct interaction with those leaders. And then our whole senior leadership team, so all of Peter, our CEO's direct reports, all Skype in at various times during the program to talk about the module that they Skype in, you know, during that time. So, you know, that group gets, and we do the whole thing on video conference. So that group gets their exposure to the senior leadership. They get exposure to kind of the next level of leadership through the alumni, cycling through, and in many cases, mentoring relationships spring up as part of the workshops. So it's
a great program.
Hopefully it gets to the point where it's self-sustaining and I don't have to deliver in modules anymore.
What kind of feedback have you been getting from, how long have you run this program?
So 3 years now.
3 years.
Yes.
So what kind of feedback are you getting from the from the executives who've gone through it?
Right. So we actually do a survey at the start of the class, and that's more around a self-assessment, which is around confidence and competence on certain key criteria and topics that we cover during the workshop. We survey at the end of the workshop, and we also do just I guess in a way, a feedback survey on the whole workshop. And typically the feedback has been very good. It's been very positive in terms of, wow, the organization is investing in me as a leader. They must really care. So from an engagement perspective, learned a lot of things that perhaps I'd stopped doing, learned some things that, you know, reminded me to do differently. Networking. networking has just been one of the biggest benefits,
Yeah,
which
I
was,
would assume
you know,
that.
to understand that there is a manager or a leader in a different country or a different region that's having similar problems with me that I can now connect with and share. That's been very powerful. What we did measure then, 12 months after we started it, we went back to the managers of the leaders that had been through the workshop and asked them to rate on a scale of prior to the workshop versus after the workshop. We were looking for 4 specific behaviors. You know, did their direct reports, did they display that behavior more consistently or less consistently before and after the workshop? We've seen a behavior move around the expectations that our CEO had set. And then just recently, we did a survey. Specifically, we were looking now for quantifiable information. So we wanted to understand, you know, what was some of the behavior change? What was the business impact? What was the quantifiable business impact that you had? And so we've now started to collect that information as well. And so, you know, seeing things like reduced attrition, cost reductions, increased productivity, and so on, that are now being fed back as case studies to us.
Yeah, those are great statistics. I mean, because that's really what it's about.
Correct.
Because now you're measuring the value of the program.
Yes.
So it isn't about cost or 3 days or they tested well at the end of the program.
Or they liked it, they were happy with the fruit that we gave them.
Yeah, the food was really good. It's all about how has it helped them improve business outcomes for Unisys.
Yes, yes.
That's great.
Has the program actually impacted the bottom line?
Right.
Have, you know, now, because behavior change doesn't necessarily have an immediate impact, but after 3 years, can we start to see that?
You see a trend. You have
Yes.
data points.
Yes.
That's great. So what do you see as some of the key skills that the C-suite executives need to be able to exhibit as they navigate through this dramatic shift that's going on in our global economy?
So I think there are a number of skills that they're going to need to start building now so that they can cope with those changes. We spoke earlier on about the speed of change that is coming. So I think, you know, some of the skills that our leaders are going to need to develop, as well as our up-and-coming leaders as they're coming to the organization, are things like agility. You know, adaptability, the ability to move through change, so to not let it slow you down. You know, the World Economic Forum published at the beginning of this year, where they spoke about how, you know, the majority of the roles that are available now will not be the same roles in 2025. The skills, you know, that will be required for these new roles, we haven't even figured out yet what they are. So to think about, you know, what the leaders will need to perhaps manage people in those roles. You know, it's these elements of adaptability. It's the ability to be highly collaborative, you know, which for many years we've really taught our leaders that, you know, you're collaborative while you're working your way up the ladder, and then, you know, when you get to the top, you've got to be the leader. You've got to stand out from everybody. Whereas the new skills for the future is about collaboration. It's about leveraging skills from all over, and that can be cross-functional teams, it can be outside your region, outside your country, and so on. So it's using all of the digital technology we spoke about earlier on to leverage and to realize that your team may no longer be perhaps in your country, even in your time zone, but you now may be leveraging skills with people, you know, right around the world. And how do you embrace that rather than just tolerating it? You know, how do you really leverage that to make it work for the team? So it's those kind of new skills. How do you motivate a virtual team? How do you manage? You know, because there are still management activities that have to happen to ensure that the team is collaborating but still producing what you need them to produce when you've maybe never met them.
One of the trends today is, you know, fail fast, fail often. And that from a leadership perspective is contrary to what it used to be. Right? Because everything has to be, we got to make sure we do it right. So we're going to have this incremental progress, where today the speed of change, and you talked about that, is executives have to think completely differently. So
And Phil, that's one of those skills that they're going to have to develop. They're going to have to develop comfort with failure.
Yeah.
They're going to have to, you know, learn to, again, to embrace it rather than to tolerate it.
Right.
You know, the old adage of, well, you get to make one mistake, but, you know, don't make it again. That kind of thing needs to change.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is also around this new model of teams.
Yes.
If you know, Kevin Mulcahy and Jeannie from the Future Workplace and a lot of other organizations are talking about this whole gig economy and what that's going to mean. I mean, we could have people, as a leader, I could have people in my team that are really only in my team for a project. I don't own them as a team anymore. I don't have really positional or hierarchical power over them. I have to learn to motivate people that really I may only have for 2 weeks. And then they go away, and they may not even be permanent associates or employees of the company. I may just get, you know, what effectively we call contractors nowadays. They will form parts of these teams that we have to work with. And, you know, those kind of concepts are really, it's not traditionally taught to leaders how to manage and how to communicate and how to collaborate and so on in this level of differences.
So I want to thank Emma for joining us today, and hope that you will all join us for another segment of Sartor TV.